Check one. Check one. Hello. Hello. And welcome to Comic Book Herald Live. Hey, everybody. I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. You are listening to CBH Live here on the Comic Book YouTube channel, or perhaps the Comic Book Herald podcast. So many options. Today, we are going to be talking about really one thing. But it has opened the door to many things. This is going to be a fairly loosely structured conversation. Get in your thoughts, get in your questions here in the live chat if you're listening live. But primarily today, we're going to be focused on Amazing Spider-Man number 26, which came out today. It is in the conversation for me for historically loathed comics. Okay? Spoilers will follow if somehow you've avoided the hoopla around the big death revealed in Amazing Spider-Man number 26, which officially came out today but was revealed like 2 weeks ago. Now's your chance, right? Now's your warning. Spoilers will follow. We're going to talk about where the death of Kamala Khan today in Amazing Spider-Man ranks historically compared to big death of moments throughout Marvel Comics history, right? Is it of a piece with this tradition of Marvel Comics, or is it uniquely poorly executed? Okay, we're going to talk about that, and we're also just going to talk a little bit about... So I didn't want to have any more to say, frankly, about Amazing Spider-Man number 26. I said my piece a couple weeks ago when the news broke about who the big surprising murder victim was going to be. I think it's a very poor decision. It's surprising for the sake of being surprising. It is, at a minimum, a very, I think, crass choice to kill off the second most popular new character behind Miles Morales, star of Across the Spider-Verse, in theaters right now. Plug, even though I get no credit for that. To kill off that character in a totally unrelated book, that she's like now this shell of herself supporting player in Amazing Spider-Man. I didn't like that one bit. A handful of folks were like, listen, just read you haven't even read the comic first. Like, how dare you criticize this thing? And at the moment I was definitely like, no, it'll prove me right. Like, there's nothing that could happen in that comic that would change the macro context of Marvel editorially, literally and figuratively killing off their youth, right? And destroying sort of the new characters and diversity that they had built in the 2010s. What did happen, though, upon finally caving and reading Amazing Spider-Man number 26, is it's actually way worse than I was imagining. I knew I wouldn't like the decision, purely on a vision level, purely on what it represents about, again, the C.B. Cebulski administration's 5 years now of really just like eradicating young, diverse characters from their lineup, save Miles Morales. And this is documented. I've documented it now pretty effectively here in the CBH newsletter. Like, go down the list: Squirrel Girl, Lunella Lafayette, Nadia Van Dyne, Riri Williams, Ironheart, Sam Alexander, Amadeus Cho, Joaquin Torres, Rayshawn Lucas, Raz Malhotra. These characters are disappearing or getting disappeared basically since the end of Champions in 2021, but in most cases, really right before the pandemic. Like, everything was wrapping pre-pandemic, then that hits, publication gets canceled, and Marvel has just kind of not brought these characters back, with the exception of little short stories, little one-offs, little maybe unlimited Infinity comics, right? So it's not like they're like 100% completely forgotten, but they certainly are not the stars of their own show, and there's no Champions book to speak of. Okay, so that is the macro context for why I knew I wasn't going to like this issue, but I did not fully expect to like be this impressed by what a mess Amazing Spider-Man number 26 actually is. It is one of the things that was the hardest to get my head around was, okay, so Zeb Wells, John Romita Jr., the Amazing Spider-Man team, have said they're going to kill off Kamala Khan in this issue. Okay, um, and this issue, this run, has not focused on Kamala. She is the eighth most important character in this comic, at best. Probably not even that high, you know? So one of the things I had a hard time getting my head around was like, how are you going to actually justify like giving her this moment? Okay, if we're going to do this, and listen, I understand in Marvel Comics, you're not anyone until you've died, right? Like that is the medium right now. Is superheroes die and they come back, and it'll be used to write whatever it is they want to do with Kamala and Mutant Hood and ties to the MCU and blah blah blah, right? We all get that that's gonna happen. That could happen amazingly well. I hope it does, but it will not change the fact that this Amazing Spider-Man run is about Peter, Paul, and Mary. Okay, it is, and this horrible, just god awful Rabin, mad mathematician. Like in all the hoopla about the death of Kamala today, and all the many ways that can be criticized, don't ever forget that Rabin is a horrible villain for Spider-Man. He makes Moreland look incredible from JR's last run with J. Michael Straczynski back in the early 2000s. Makes Moreland look absolutely incredible. Okay. But anyway, what I was getting at there is it's not Kamala's story at all. This issue opens with the framing of Kamala, then she gets quickly relegated to the background, is then shuttled into the action just in time to masquerade as Mary Jane Watson and die using her power set in a way that I don't think has been used in like 8 years. Like there's a line like, I don't even know if I could do that anymore. Nobody did, because the character stopped doing that. Just like straight up shape-shifting. It's a horrible, horrible comic. If you're going to treat this as the death of Kamala Khan, the book should be about her. Instead, it's more about the surprise, right? The structure and the setup of this is all leading you to believe that Mary Jane's going to die here. But instead, it's a fake out. Okay? And that is what Kamala, Miss Marvel, the best new teen character in Marvel Comics since 2014 and longer in my view, okay, is a fake out. That's it. That's all she got relegated to. Maybe it'll be a fridging in the sense of she'll now be motivation for Spider-Man to add to his Spider-Man No More death count, okay? But the semantics on that are besides the point for me. It's very, very poorly executed issue. It's just all over the map. In the middle of this comic, MJ and reality hopping husband Paul just straight up lose their kids, Scarlet Witch style, and it's like that's like an afterthought by comparison to what's happening here. Just a tragedy. I mean, it's supposed to be tragic, but it is emotionless. It is an absolute mess. And it's going to go down. I think the big thing to emphasize here, okay, is I don't especially care at this point about really anything happening in this run. You know, for a while it was on the fence in terms of like, okay, maybe this could get good. Now it's like, no, this is actively bad. Like, okay, I'll check it out the next go, see if some other creators can write the ship. But the big thing I think to acknowledge here is Amazing Spider-Man number 26. This is going to go down as like a historically bad comic. Okay? Like we are living through a moment in history. And not the kind you want to be. Like, here's the list of comics that typically get talked about when we're talking about the worst Marvel comics, right? Just like pure garbage in terms of like just the worst ideas, stuff that absolutely infuriated fans. All of them, I'm sure, have their defenders, and they're all wrong. Avengers number 200. A bunch of Chuck Austin X-Men stuff, which I'm actually not nearly as harsh on as the folks who lived through it. Civil War 2. Marvel, which is actually the worst comic book of all time. It's not just bad by Marvel standards. It is actually the worst comic book that has ever been published. One More Day, Sins Past in the Spideyverse. Okay? Trouble, and Ultimatum. Those are often the comics that get talked about the most frequently when we're just talking about like very bad, no good Marvel comics. Amazing Spider-Man number 26 is going to get entered into that chat. Okay? Time will tell. And time will tell that I'm right here. It's going to get entered into that chat. It's going to be considered, I think, truly one of the worst Marvel books. It's just like an absolute... it's surprising how disastrous it is. I assumed it would be competently handled and a decision, again, in the grand scheme of things, that I did not like. It is instead incompetently handled, forced in, and and a decision that I greatly dislike. When you're looking just at Marvel death ofs, okay, and I'm not necessarily just focusing here on like death of blank, right? Like death of Wolverine is like an official event kind of thing. I'm just talking about like just when characters die, when it's like a moment. So for example, Magneto's death in Judgment Day would be like a death of story. Where does this Amazing Spider-Man Kamala Khan death of fit in that grand scheme of things? I guess let's answer here. Are any death ofs good to begin with? It's a thing that we take for granted in superhero comics, especially now, as a given, right? Like, okay, characters are going to die. In Marvel Comics, it's going to be used for some small degree of storytelling pathos, and then it's going to get, undone and retconned because the toys have to go back in the box. But, like, when has it been done well? Okay, so some examples. Kraven's Last Hunt, I would say, is actually the best version of this. The Death of the Stacys. Captain Stacy and Gwen Stacy. Controversial still, even now, but incredibly memorable and hugely iconic in terms of the trajectory of Marvel Comics, of Big Two Comics, and certainly of Spider-Man comics. Personally, I really like the death of Johnny Storm in the pages of Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four. That's like the most recent one that I'm the most into. It doesn't last for long. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. It still pulls emotion out of that moment, despite there being a lot of setup, despite there being a lot of expectation that that's going to happen. And of course, even despite the fact that it gets undone almost immediately, it's still effective. I thought the death of Magneto in Judgment Day was handled really well by Al Ewing and Kieran Gillen. And then you have, the OGs, right? You have Jim Starlin, death of Captain Marvel. You have the death of Elektra and Frank Miller's Daredevil. And the death of Jean Grey in the Phoenix Saga. Jean and Elektra certainly could criticize on a number of levels, but they are a part of iconic best of Marvel Comics type runs. Okay, then you go so the answer to the question essentially is yes, there are good death of stories in Marvel Comics. You go to the other side of the spectrum though, and you look at, well, when has it not worked? And that's more often, certainly, as is the case with all comics, right? Generally, things don't work more often than they do. That's why the stuff that does work is so exciting. Here, what I would say are the worst of the bunch prior to this point. The ones that are messier, don't work, sometimes are actual problems. Stature's death in Young Avengers: The Children's Crusade. The Civil War II death of the Hulk. Remember that? Now, technically, this set up Immortal Hulk. So in retrospect, you're almost just like, all right, if we had to go through Civil War II mess to get to that, I guess it was worth it. Death of Wolverine. I did not hate in the moment, but it does not hold up especially well. It looks really good. Steve McNiven knows what he's doing. But it's not a comic that holds up especially well. Death of X. That was during the Lost Years with X-Men and Inhumans, and was the death of Scott Summers, although maybe he'd been Bruce Willising the whole time. And Death of the Inhumans, which was written by Johnny Cate. I think it's Ariel Olivetti. Really a mess on every conceivable level. Not offensive, right? Not like a bunch of problems in Death of the Inhumans, aside from just like not working at all. And just feeling kind of cruel. I think in your death of, it's often most important to be almost like a eulogy for this celebrated character that, generally speaking, is going to have fans that love the character. Okay. Um, in the case of the Inhumans, it was just kind of like nasty, I guess. And then Kamala Khan, the death of Kamala Khan in Amazing Spider-Man. Like, immediately, I'm like, is that actually the worst death of in Marvel Comics history? Like, I've got a list here of like 30, and I can't find any that are really worse. I mean, I think I don't know, there's no rather Reed scenario here because we're talking about one. Like Death of X is awful. It's really bad. But even that, I feel like there might be moments between Emma and Scott that I'm more, at least are interesting compared to just, borderline killing Kamala off panel. You know? I think it's actually the worst death in the history of Marvel Comics. There's a possibility, given that it came out today and that I'm talking about it right now, that I'm overreacting. Right? This could be your team just lost and it's that night and you're losing your mind. Okay? Maybe it's a slight overreaction to things. But I'm telling you, I pulled the list of death ofs. I don't think any are worse in Marvel. Okay? Specifically in Marvel Comics. Tevia here in the comments points out Ultimatum killing everyone are worse deaths. I mean, here's the thing. I would read Ultimatum twice before I read Amazing Spider-Man number 26 again. Okay? Listen, is Ultimatum actually good? No. It's like one of my 20 least favorite comics of all time. But for about an issue and a half, it's pretty interesting. And then Blob starts eating people and it goes off the rails, right? A lot of meaningless, cruel. That's where the cruelty is the point, in a way that I think is pretty nasty. It's a death of that really doesn't work, and we just read this for the My Marvel This Year podcast. Grant Morrison's Planet X with Phil Jimenez. You have the death of Jean Grey and the death of Magneto in New X-Men there, in the final Planet X story. A really messy, controversial semi-ending to New X-Men. Those deaths don't work especially well, I don't think. But certainly better than this. Certainly better than this. All right. Get in some thoughts. Get in some questions here. Am I way overreacting? Am I way overreacting? Let's see what people say. M. Blue Sea Marvel says death only matters if it sticks. The original Kraven the Hunter is KIA. Death never sticks in comics now. So, and you know what though? Like, that's a big thing about House of X and Powers of 10 and about Hickman's vision for X-Men comics. The whole reason Resurrection exists as a Krakoan protocol is to take that storytelling crutch out of comics and out of the vision for Marvel Comics. You have Resurrection on the Mutant Island Nation. You can't do a cheap death of story anymore because Hickman recognized that had gotten way overused, right? That it had no meaning anymore. That was incredibly smart. Immortal Hulk realized the same thing at the same time. So it is like you have those lessons learned. You have these incredibly successful, beloved comics teaching them and incorporating them. And then 2 years later, you have Marvel turning around and saying, well, let's do a shock stunt for publicity and kill off a character in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man. It's like nothing ever changes. Nothing ever changes with these guys. Let's see. What else do we got? Yep, Randall says here, this gimmicky death feels like the type of thing Hickman was trying to avoid with his resurrection protocols. That's all. Like, that's what Kamala is reduced to. A gimmick. A marketing plug. A sales tactic. This is a character who means things to people, who is interesting and has had good stories told about them. They shouldn't be reduced to that. That sucks for fans who actually care. Tevio says, what about the death of Goliath in Civil War I? That's messy. That should be on the list for sure. That was when Tony, Reed, and Hank created Ragnarok, the Thor clone, who woke up and immediately killed Bill Foster, or almost immediately. Yeah, that one's pretty bad and pretty tangential to what's supposed to be happening there. I don't know where exactly on the list, but like, I mean, Civil War is eons more interesting. And that's not even the right word to use to describe something. James says, Death of Colossus hit me with a punch back in the day. Yeah, Death of Colossus hit me too, actually, at the time. I mean, I don't think that story is super effective now, but you take, Ileana and then Peter both getting hit by the legacy virus in a short span of time. It also set up a really cool moment in Astonishing X-Men, certainly at the time. Let's see. What else do we got here? It says there's a degree to which it's not a death of story, though, right? It says Mr. Evil Dr. Porkchop. It's kind of just an issue of Amazing Spider-Man. Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of why I dislike it so much as a death of, as what's supposed to be a big moment for Kamala, is because yes, it's like 85% just another issue of Spider-Man. Like the story Zeb Wells is actually telling here is about Mary Jane, Peter, and Paul, and these kids who came from another reality. And again, this awful, but at least he's consistent, villain, Raven, or whatever the heck he's called, Rabid Raven. That's the story that the creators clearly are telling. And then there's a real feel here of an editorial mandate of we got to do something big here and shoehorning it into, again, what is 85% of the story. And that's what I think is so especially crass about all this. Like, listen, if we were 26 issues into this and Kamala had been a significant supporting player in this run, had developed a relationship with Peter and was learning how to be a hero, and you had this sort of, kind of like you get with Peter or Miles, where you have like this legacy, this generational thing of the original teen hero now teaching a new teen hero what they've learned, that could be an interesting story. That could be cool. That's not this book. It's not there at all. It's not there to the point that when Miss Marvel is dying, she sees Spidey without his mask and is like, oh, you're Spider-Man. Which, like, have they not met before? like she knows Miles Morales very well. Has this not come up before? Regardless, I don't care. Like, it doesn't matter. The point is, they don't have any emotional connection. They are not connected throughout these 25 issues. This isn't a short run. This isn't the first arc of the book. It's not building to that at all. So is it surprising in that regard? Yes. Okay? It's surprising because it's irrelevant. It has nothing to do with what's going on in the comic. It doesn't work. It does not work. Let's see. Brandon says, is it the character herself's death or how the death was executed in the story that bothered you the most? Well, I guess that's what I'm saying is I already knew the character herself's death in this situation was a problem. And hopefully I've articulated some of why. I think certainly a couple weeks ago I did it more effectively. But then reading the story itself, I do think does make it actually worse. I mean, it is a sloppy, careless way to do it. And it is like, all right, if you're going to make this bad decision, can you handle it with some care? And the answer here was absolutely not. Absolutely not. We're going to be as lazy and shoehorned in about it as possible. And I do think that's worse. I do think that's more offensive. Yeah, it stinks. It stinks. All right, that's really all there is to it. I really think it's the worst Marvel death of moment of all time. And it's going to be... I don't know that it's going to be historically as reviled as something like an Avengers number 200. I mean, even like a One More Day or a Sins Past. I mean, the thing about One More Day and Sins Past, first off, I think this issue kind of makes Sins Past look like Ulysses. Makes it look like just the highest literary standard. But the thing about those issues is they actually play with Spider-Man stuff. They actually play with the Spider-Man mythos and relevant characters in the world of Peter Parker. I think this is going to get extremely forgotten in the sense that it's so irrelevant, and that's part of what maybe the thing that I keep falling back on that I'm the most annoyed about. Oh, this comic's giving me a sore throat. That's how bad it is. Let's see. Mr. Evil Dr. Porkchop says, I agree it's crass and a bad decision, but I think that the expectations on this being a big death of Miss Marvel probably don't help the comic stand on its own terms. The comic does not stand on its own terms. You could take your expectations completely out of this. It would still be a very ineffective, very messy, end to a supernatural screw-up that went sideways like 3 issues ago. This run is off the tracks. Okay. There's a lot of blame being thrown around today, especially at the hands of Zeb Wells. When a comic is going well, writer gets too much credit. When it's going badly, they get too much blame. Zeb Wells is a good comic book writer. It's a good writer, full stop. You don't go from writing the best X-Men comic of the last 3 years, the best episode of She-Hulk, to like not knowing what to do with a pen. This isn't a Chuck Knobloch situation. I don't think Zeb Wells forgot how to write. Okay? Amazing Spider-Man is a challenging book to be on. For any creator. It is not a creator-owned work. You do not get to walk into those waters and do what you want to do a lot of the time. Right? I think a lot of times we see, oh, bring such and such big name onto Amazing Spider-Man. Don't you think at a certain point there's a reason those writers maybe don't want that job? You know? Like, it's a bit tainted. It's a bit too structured. It's Marvel's Mickey Mouse in so many ways, and that sucks, I think. But it really limits what Spidey books can be. I mean, when you think about what are the best moments in Spider-Man comics of the 2000s, 23 years, okay? First thing people are going to mention is Ultimate Spider-Man. It's a separate universe. They'd be right, okay? But we talk 616 specifically. What are the best moments? There's a handful. But it's often stuff that changes things and that gives the illusion of change most effectively. Peter becoming a junior high teacher in the JMS JR run in the early 2000s. All the spider totem stuff, whether it works or not, it's something different, something unique. Doc Ock taking over as a superior Spider-Man during my favorite part of the Dan Slott stuff. Spider-Verse. Way worse than the movies, but still a really good idea. Really flipping good idea from Dan Slott and team. Okay? All that stuff, though, generally, has to kind of get put in the box at a certain point because it's too much change. Spidey especially has to be reset constantly. Not because it actually makes sense, but because that's the way Marvel treats this thing. Editorially. Spider-Man has to be a certain constant block of superhero. And that really limits the creativity that can come out of that book. When I think about, the other stuff in Spidey that is my favorite, it's all stuff that came outside the title. Chip Zdarsky writing Spectacular Spider-Man, or Spider-Man Life Story. Tom Taylor with moments on Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. It's these moments that come outside of Amazing. It's a hard book to take over and really take to new heights. And I think that's part of the challenge that Marvel faces with this character. I forget what the original question was. As far as like the execution of the story. Anyway, the point being, Zeb Wells is a really good comic writer. He's going to write good comics after this and good stories after this. John Romita Jr., flippin' legend. Is he what he was? I don't think so. But still, like, that's not the problem. The problem isn't he doesn't have the chops. You know, when a comic goes this sideways, when it's this, I don't know if it's universally reviled, but certainly reviled on my opinion. Um, when it goes this sideways, though, like that's a collaborative mess up. Okay, that's editorial, that's creative. Like you cannot just put the blame here on like, oh, Zeb Wells did this thing. Who knows if this was even his idea, right? I mean, you see this all the time now, where creators are like, oh yeah, I had to do that thing. The editors made me. We don't know that stuff until years later. You know, you see that with the Tom King Batman run, right? All these moments that went absolutely sideways, like the Bat and the Cat wedding stuff, and then King, a couple years later, is like, yeah, I had to do that thing, and we had to get Dick shot, and that wasn't actually my plan, and blah blah blah. All these things that fans are like, I hate that, and I hate this writer, and they get all upset about. It's like didn't even want to do that. Settle down, calm down. So I think in that regard, like I don't want to overstate the historic like lack of quality of this issue. I don't want to overstate it in terms of outrage and hatred towards anyone involved in the making of the comic. That is not where I'm coming from and not what I'm interested in. Where I'm coming from is the editorial and aligned vision regarding Miss Marvel and how it now fits into Spider-Man history and just how that compares to what this publisher has done over time. It's truly some of the worst execution I've ever seen. It's a bummer. I think if something like this happened in the X office, in any of the X-Men comics right now, it's the sort of thing where I'd be like, I don't think I'm reading those books anymore. Like I would check out. Now, with Amazing Spider-Man, it's very easy because I was not that invested to begin with. I don't have to make some pronounced boycott here to pretend like I'm taking a stand. I didn't really care to keep up with this run to begin with. I jumped in because it was teasing this giant thing was coming, and I was curious. But if something like this happened in the X books, it'd be a real like, oh boy, the vision here is just like awful. I think I'm out. I think I'm done. I don't know. I mean, so Tabby asks here a question that kind of alludes to what I'm talking about here in terms of not being where I'm coming from, which is, why do you think editorial hates us Spidey fans? This gets tossed around a lot. I don't think anyone at Marvel Comics hates fans. I think generally speaking, they are themselves fans. Okay? I was looking yesterday. I saw somebody tweet, Dark Horse Comics, published some fantastic comic books, is hiring an assistant editor. I clicked it because I'm always curious. It's like, I know it's not realistic for me in my life, but I'm always curious. What would that look like? What are they looking for? And one thing they had on the job description was salary, proposed, tentative salary. The low end of that salary was $37K here in America. Okay, for an assistant editor at a well-established publisher, not Marvel and DC, right? But Dark Horse is well known. They publish Hellboy. Okay, $37K. That is where my career started when I had no idea what I was doing. And I was 21. And I was pretending to know things about marketing. Okay? At a very small agency in Illinois. That's like, if you're going into comics and you're going to be an assistant editor and you're going to take the brunt of this social mayhem that comes your way for involvement in a story with Spider-Man, and you're making a salary even in that ballpark, you're not doing it for money. You're doing it because you love comics. Find me the editors that don't actually love comics in these characters. Do they exist? I don't know, probably. Few and far between. Okay? I think disagreements with decisions, that's what would happen between us as fans, right? But this idea that there's some sort of agenda or hatred towards the readership itself, that's not, I don't think that's what is ever happening. I don't think that's ever the case. Truly. I think the real problem, the real thing that's happening is there's an attempted vision. It has gone horribly sideways. It is off the rails. And it's not personal, I guess is the thing. It's not about you, you know? They're trying to tell stories that will sell comic books. They're failing to tell them effectively. And that is like the hardest thing to do. That's the whole game, is making good comics. If it was easy, everyone would do it. You know? There are not many good superhero comics right now, full stop. Full stop. What are the good superhero comics right now? Like, genuinely really good. Holds up with other good comics coming out. Okay? I think we're in a shallow fallow period. Which one of those is right? Clearly, this is why I don't edit it. This is why I can't get that Dark Horse job. We're in a fallow period. What are the good superhero comics right now? X-Men Red. Mortal X-Men, maybe. Can get there. Okay. Jed McKay, Moon Knight. Maybe. Good, not great. I'm talking great. We got no Immortal Hulk. We got no Hoxpox. Whatever Tom King's done. I don't know. Is Human Target done yet? You know, I don't think any of the King stuff is great right now. Always interesting. What are the great superhero comics right now? Okay? It's a hard thing to do. It really is. But you know, their failure to do that is not an affront to your fan. I would guess 99% of the time. All right, what do we got here? Super Thor says this better not start a trend if it does make some numbers. I mean, the trend is that Marvel wants nothing to do with the wave of youthful, diverse characters that were created in the 2010s. That's already happening. That has happened. Miles would be a victim of that, but for the success of Into the Spider-Verse and now Across the Spider-Verse. And the video games. For now, Miles is safe. But that's the trend. Open Mike Eglass, would this have landed any different if it had been a classic Spider-Man villain? That's an interesting question. Probably. Yeah. I mean, I would have been more invested in the arc in general. Like, I'm super checked out on Rabin. I don't like that character. That's a swing and a miss for me. I appreciate the swing, but it's a huge miss. Yeah. I mean, there's a Green Goblin scheme. Or what, and I know he's reformed, blah, blah, blah. Yes, to a degree, but you'd still have all the macro outside the comic problems about the Miss Marvel situation specifically. You know, I mean, so ultimately, too, I think what you're saying is like, you know, I think another way of phrasing it is like, could this have worked if it had been done totally differently? The answer is yes. Yes, we have examples of that where death ofs do work and can be effective. But this is not that world. We are not in that strand of the multiverse. Let's see. I'm seeing a couple I miss Nick Spencer comments. Do you? Do you though? Like, that run got so stale. That got so stale. For like 50 plus issues. Okay? I mean, if we're talking Spidey and what we miss. I like Superior Spider-Man a lot. I was invested in that time period. The Dan Slott era and the Brand New Day stuff, like, you have really nice moments, including some Zeb Wells wrote in Shed. But yeah, I don't miss the previous run at all. All right, what else we got? Randall asks, you think about having someone write something on this for CBH? If somebody has an interesting pitch, sure. I mean, I covered the Marvel editorial direction regarding young characters and Kamala for the CBH newsletter. I would definitely be interested in somebody having, like, a little more specificity around what this means to them and Kamala specifically. But we'll see. We'll see what the pitches look like. Braden says, how dare you? Moon Knight is revolutionary. Appreciate the fandom there. Osiris says, I think the current Deadpool and FF runs are great. See, listen, y'all. I appreciate you all liking comics and loving your Marvel comics, but like, great. I like Fantastic Four run currently. Great. There are tiers here. Let's see. Um, okay. Julio asks, when was the last great Peter run? Uh, some people would say this, but I mean, Spider-Man Life Story, but that's a limited series. It's not really a run. I mean, I would still kind of say Superior Spider-Man by virtue of taking Peter out of the spotlight. I like the JMS John Romita Jr. stuff a lot until it hits like Since Past. Great feels a little strong. I mean, nothing in the 90s. Um, Spectacular Spider-Man by J.M. DeMatteis and Sal Buscema is probably the last genuinely great straight up Peter Parker run. And of course, it's the one that's like the least well collected and the most scattershot still on Marvel Unlimited. Baffled by that. Baffled. Let's see. Tevi asks, I'm wondering how you would fix Amazing Spider-Man comics after this run is over. Obviously, that's the $1,000,000 question. For a long time, I was really into the idea. For a minute there, I was like, okay, how do you hoxpox everything? Right? So you take Hickman's House of X and Powers of 10 approach, and you say, how do you do that or Immortal Hulk even, being a template, right? How do you do that and come in with a really strong vision that can truly transform a character set or a team from something that has gotten stale to something feels very new and fresh? I feel like Spider-Man comics, we have a lot of examples of how this has been done effectively. They're just all outside comics, right? Spider-Man on PS4 is an example of a very familiar kind of refresh, but the story is incredibly compelling. And some of that's a little tricky in video game where it's like, okay, is the story actually that good? Or do I just like playing this game? I think it's a combination in that case. And then, of course, you have the Spider-Verse movies, which does tease out maybe the thing that Marvel will avoid the hardest, but maybe is the best choice, which is to say, for the love of God, move Peter along and let Miles be Spider-Man. I don't think that having your cake and eating it too is working really well. I think it's something that, Marvel ran into this crossroads post-Secret Wars where, okay, we're going to have all these legacy characters, and we're going to have a bunch of new young characters, but every single time they tried to have their cake and eat it too, where they kept around the old guard. Okay? They didn't actually let any of these characters, like, be new. And I wonder if Miles in 616 would benefit the most from that. That said, you do then have the video game approach where it's like, no, they're both around, and maybe that can be more compelling. Although, really, we haven't seen that yet. That's kind of what the new game is going to be. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I for a while I thought like, okay, maybe you go in just a totally new direction. You zig where everyone would zag. You go really sci-fi, do all sorts of stuff with the Spider-Verse and the multiverse. Really lean into like what Hickman and Chiquetto did in that Spider-Verse multiverse short story. Forget where that even was. Was it like Amazing Fantasy 1000 or something like that? Lean into that approach because that is now what, not necessarily a majority, but a lot of fans know about Spider-Man is the multiverse stuff. Maybe you go that direction. I don't think anything tried and true and classic is that interesting. It's all kind of been done. Anything that is like Peter at the Bugle with Mary to MJ and their little girl Mayday. I've read a lot of comics about that. There's that whole Amazing Spider-Man Renew Your Vows stuff. Could it still be a good comic? Yeah, but it's also like nothing about that is especially fresh. So I don't think you're actually saving Spider-Man by putting him just in more comfortable familiar territory. I don't. See, Christoph says bring Hickman to Spider-Man. Hickman can't be the answer to everything wrong with Marvel, can he? I mean, maybe. Listen, I don't think it's a great fit, but I also don't know. I think the one thing that Hickman would actually do better than anyone on Spider-Man has nothing to do with the actual comics writing itself. It would be actually having a creator with the gravity and the profile to push things editorially. I mean, that's so much of what Hickman's power was as the head of X for House and Powers was you have a creator with their vision, but they're also like an assistant editor, or they're also like, general manager of the team. You would need that on Spider-Man, maybe more than anything right now. Maybe more than anything. So that'd be the biggest thing you could get. Let's see. MC Pick says, I haven't been big on MCU synergy like Agatha Harkness changing. Yeah, that was goofy. But I hope Miss Marvel isn't going to be the victim with this. I think actually the MCU synergy thing will kind of help Miss Marvel in the sense that it will get her brought back faster. Probably. It will probably prioritize some shifts. Am I interested in seeing the comic character reflect the MCU power set? No, I'm not. Being made a mutant? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't love MCU synergy stuff, but I don't think it'll be too painful. I don't know, maybe. CT Kook says, bring Grant Morrison to Spider-Man. Nah. Nope. First off, Morrison would never. Second off, bad fit. Bad fit. Spider-Man's not weird or complicated enough for Morrison. The X-Men did kind of work because they are a messy group and a whole culture and civilization, and you have individuals who look like, gross bugs and stuff. And I don't know, Spider-Man's just a pretty good-looking white guy. I don't think it's weird enough for Morrison. Yeah. Okay. All right. Final sip of water. We are sponsored today by Big Water. I forgot to mention that. Got this one. Let's see. They sent me some from the fridge filter this time. It's good cold stuff. You can probably get some from your fridge filter or friends as well. I mean, I think the idea of like, I'd want to read this run where, okay, Peter and MJ are married and they're sitting with the kid, and Miles is the main Spidey. I kind of want to read it, but it's also like, that's not that interesting. That's not that unique. And then you're just going to run into the same will he, won't he stuff with with Peter putting the costume back on. I just think you actually have to push. What are the boundaries and get uncomfortable with it? That's what Immortal Hulk does. Okay? Hulk was really stale, really tired. What do you do? Kirkman for Spider-Man. I'd be surprised to see Robert Kirkman take on a serious look at a big two character at this point in their life. Would not be a bad Spider-Man writer, but Kirkman's had his moments. He'll continue to have some interesting creator-owned stuff, I'm sure, but I don't need to see them on a big two property. I don't think. Okay. I think that's gonna do it. I think we did it. Did we? Okay, so just to reiterate, the best death ofs in the history of Marvel Comics. Let's do top 5. Death of Captain Marvel. Death of Magneto. That's controversial. Death of Human Torch. 3. Death of the Stacys. Kraven's Last Hunt. Surprise, true number 1. Death of Alpha Flight in the pages of Bendis' New Avengers. The worst death ofs in the history of Marvel. We'll do the top 5 or bottom 5 again. Fifth worst, Civil War II Hulk. Fourth, death of Wolverine. Third, death of X. Second, death of the Inhumans. Worst, Kamala. Today. Oh boy. The worst Marvel death of all time. You heard it here first. Heard it here first, baby. All right. Let's see. Any final questions or thoughts before we go? Banksy asks, are you back to starting at this time, or does it just depend on circumstances? I kind of like just, nobody knows. Nobody knows when I'm going to show. I'm like a pop-up tent. I'm like the pop-up shop of YouTubers. Right? Is it good for my audience and my numbers? No. Is it mysterious and fun? Also, no. Yeah, I'll probably be starting at this time. I'll probably be starting at 5:15 Central from now on. Listen, I finish work, I read the comics, and then we hop on and we talk about them. We'll get back to that schedule, I suspect. Let's see. Mike says, Kirkman and Remender said they're never going back to Marvel ever. Yeah, that sounds right. That sounds right. Xavier asks, which death of Magneto? The most recent one, in Judgment Day. Not talking about Planet X. Poor Vass says, Miss Marvel died? WTF. We did give the spoiler warning at the front. Oh, boy. How does him giving amazing to Zdarsky sound to you? I'm a little Zdarsky'd out. It is an interesting pick. I mean, he's got a Spider-Man omnibus. He's done Spidey stuff. I'd be surprised if he wanted to. I don't think it makes a lot of sense, again, like in terms of freshness. I feel like, no, that doesn't feel right. Doesn't feel right. No shade against creator. Like, Public Domain's been great. Their Daredevil has been fantastic. And I need to catch up on the Batman stuff, but I'm sure it's good. But no, it just kind of feels like, that moment has passed. Christoph asks actually maybe the most interesting question, which is there a Marvel superhero who hasn't died already? Hasn't died already. Whew, that's tough. Well, I mean, has Storm actually ever died? Have we ever had a death of Storm? We had a de-aging and a re-aging. Did we ever actually have the death of Storm? We had an alternate reality in Sins of Sinister. I feel like she's up there. If you look at like the Avengers roster, I mean, good luck. Has Carol died? She's depowered and put into a coma by Rogue. But has Carol Danvers had a death of? Don't know that she has. What about Wanda? Maybe there are some. Maybe there's a few. All right. I'm seeing a few people pointing out again, Ultimatum should be more thoroughly in the conversation for worst deaths of all time. Yeah, the scope and the magnitude of Ultimatum is probably worse. No, it's definitely worse. It's worse than the death of Kamala Khan in Amazing Spider-Man number 26. You're right. You're all right. Ultimatum was actually more damaging than this one issue that came out today. That's fair. I cannot disagree. Vulcan never died, Mike points out. That's a good point. Good point. Osiris calling for a Man-Spider run by Grant Morrison. I'm here. Absolutely would sign up for it. Has Man-Thing ever died? I don't know. Get out of here. Vision did die. Vision died. I'm calling it in Avengers Disassembled. Oh, because he never lived. Come on. That's absolute android prejudice. How dare you? How dare you? Death of Franklin Richards. Dan Slott effectively wrote that. A bit metaphorical, but I feel like it happened. Ooh, Sue Storm has never died, Braden points out. That's a good point. That's a good point. Has Reed died? Reed Richards ever die? Got some options. Got some options, baby. All right, look forward to all those comics coming soon. Thanks for listening, everybody. Enjoy the comics.